Born in France and raised between London and Barcelona, Scott Chasserot is a well-established and well-known professional photographer. With experience as a head of photography, freelance photo editor, staff photographer, and freelance photographer, Scott's images have been featured in the pages of The Times, Time Out London and Barcelona, The Guardian Weekend, GQ, and Sunday Times Magazine. His work has been displayed in solo and group photo exhibitions throughout Europe and internationally, as well as in books. A compilation of his street photography was published in 2013. He's won accolades for his work, including the Time Out International Photographer of the Year, awarded to him by Time Out International in 2011. He most recently designed and produced a photo-based art project which gained international attention from both media and academic scholars. The Original Ideal project asks, what do we find instinctively beautiful in the human face, and how does this translate to self-image? Through a series of carefully derived photo manipulation and EEG brain scanning processes, an aim of the Original Ideal project was to capture a glimpse of his subject's ideal self-images. The result of the project yielded a series of fascinating diptych images of his subjects in which the unedited image of the subject is positioned alongside the subject's ideal self-image achieved through photo manipulation. The project and its results beckon fundamental questions about our relationship to our self-image and our sense of self, the impact of mass media images on the recognition of our body, and perhaps even the evolution of subjectivity, perception, and embodiment within a period of increasing everyday use and encounter with technologies. The Visual Media Workshop at Kwantlen University would like to welcome Scott Chasserot as the first guest of our lecture series on digital visual culture. All right. Must seem strange to hear a bio about yourself read to you.
Yes. Very strange. Deeply, deeply uncomfortable, but I'll just push through it.
All right. So can you tell me a little bit more about, and for the people who are going to be watching this, about the Original Ideal process, what sort of steps you went through to produce it?
Well, it's been about I don't know, probably about 3 years. Came up with the original idea for it, and did a few test shoots. I mean, there was a lot of research at the beginning, working out whether it was even possible to sort of to access that kind of reaction. Using an EEG. At first, we were going to use fMRI. Spoke to a researcher in Zurich, and soon as we figured out how much it would cost, we dropped that idea like a hot potato, and went to EEG. Then started shooting some tests with just friends and acquaintances. It seemed to be working. We were getting some sort of reaction. Didn't really know whether it would have any statistical validity. Still don't really know that. But went ahead and shot the pilot, which is what was published recently. So that was about final set of images of 15 people out of maybe 30 that we shot and tested. And currently I'm sort of working out how to get funding to continue it.
So you did work with a researcher to figure out which technology to use in terms of the brain scanning. Did you work with
Yeah, well, I mean, I got, it was Alimit Ishai is the head of neuroimaging at University of Zurich. And she had been doing similar research. She recommended using fMRI. The switch to EEG, I mean, basically that was just me doing my own research. Because I did a psychology degree, I wasn't too intimidated by the jargon. Felt like I could probably dig through the literature and not get too lost. and I'm still looking. I mean, it's there's not that much research out there on this, and a lot of it seems to be a bit too close to marketing. So there are techniques that are being developed by marketers, or neuromarketers as they're called now. Because it's kind of a golden egg for them. So their results might be biased. So it's difficult. But I'm currently working with Suzanne Dicker, who's going to be helping me with that aspect of things. And in the next few days, we're going to get a new headset from the manufacturers and start digging into the raw data a bit deeper. It's an ongoing process. I mean, what I published wasn't necessarily valid scientifically. It's very dubious. I was kind of scratching the surface, but as a proof of concept, I think it works.
So I want to get into sort of the dubious part in a minute, but I wanted just to clarify, when you originally thought of this, was the intent for it to be an art-based project, or was the intent for it to be research, or was the intent for both of these goals?
No, definitely art. And I think it still is. I would like it to have some significance beyond art, and I think it has potential for that. I've had a very good reaction from the researchers that I've spoken to, and in the next phase, if that next phase happens, then I'll be taking on board their recommendations, adding certain measures, some pencil and paper questions at the end to increase the validity, the repeatability of the results, that kind of thing. But it's like I say, it's very green. That whole sort of field of neuroscience is very green.
And perception, one would think that it would be an area that there's a lot of established sort of research in it, but from what I've found as well, there's not a lot. There's lots of theories, but yeah. They're working on all that now. Yeah. So maybe in 10, 15 years time, once the neuromarketers have really pushed enough money into it, and we're all walking around with smartphones that read our minds all the time, and are sort of predicting our consumer habits and all this kind of stuff. Right. I'd say another word. Yeah, and possibly affecting our sense.
Yeah, we'll see. But it's happening now. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to get into that question. Oh, you seem to have frozen up.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay. I want to get into, use the term, I'm not sure what it was, not deception, but that sort of the crux of what I found really interesting in the video that you produced, which was what the subjects are experiencing when they see these altered images of themselves. Now, in terms of the monitors that you had everyone wear, and this is from an article that I found, it said that people would be exposed to these images, and then certain areas of the monitor would light up, showing an engagement with the image. And then in your interpretation of this engagement was sort of, and this is directly related to the title of the project, was them perceiving their ideal self or an ideal self-image. Can you talk a little bit more about that, that process and how you determine that?
Yeah, well, this is where the sort of logical jump was made. The metric that I was using is called engagement. That's the sort of one of the bog standard things that has developed out of decades of research in EEG, and it's each sort of researcher, each company, each manufacturer has their sort of proprietary mix, their sort of their mixture of weighting and their algorithm that sort of works out how engaged a subject is. And of course, as being proprietary, these algorithms are sort of closely guarded. But so it's very hard to. I couldn't say exactly, well, it's alpha, theta, gamma, all these kind of things.
I wouldn't understand it anyways.
The specific bandwidths of sort of the frequencies of activity in the brainwaves. They've worked out that somebody who's intently mentally focused on a specific stimulus will show this kind of activity in the brain. So the jump I had to make for the moment, simply because there is no sort of out of the box measure for preference yet. Was that logical jump from mental focus to preference. So the way I structured it in the meantime was that out of the 50 versions I would make for each person, 25 would be sort of gradual steps towards what would what would usually be perceived by a large group of persons as more beautiful than the original, and the other 25 in the other direction. So depending on which version they were focusing on, if there were two that they were equally focused on, and this happened a couple of times, I would make the assumption that their preference is towards the more beautiful. So obviously, in terms of sort of scientific research, that sort of invalidates this completely, obviously.
But this is really interesting what you're getting at. So I guess my next question would be, did you find a general trend amongst the images that people chose, or I should use, were more mentally focused on? Was it in fact that people gravitated more to the images that did follow the canons of beauty, on which you had, made those minor alterations?
Yes. Yeah. It was almost exclusively. But it's very hard to separate, because you can't sort of create a version. You can't sort of barbify or Ken dollify one human face and make it look even remotely credible as a possible face, as a possible human face. So it's sort of, each version is sort of a mishmash of different alterations. It could be eyes a bit more like that, nose a bit smaller. I mean, there's maybe a dozen things going on in each change. So it's not always all for the positive in a sort of bell curve distribution. You wouldn't. They don't rest cleanly on the line. So it's all, it's as a piece of research, it's very messy.
But I understand what you're saying, because one person's face, in terms of proportion and balance and what have you, could be entirely different from another person's face and their respective proportion and balance and what have you. So for every individual face, you are making these various tweaks of size and angle and what have you, respective to that I guess like the geometry of that face, you know? Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's exactly it. The it's not the canons are very sort of simplistic
right,
uh, criteria,
right,
which don't work,
right,
which don't work when you just apply them sort of with a hatchet
right,
to any given face. It doesn't just didn't work like that. When, at the beginning, the first versions I was making just looked utterly alien.
right.
And gradually, it's gotten somewhat better at it, but it's still hand to eye. It's not. They're not. I can't create them sort of using software or anything or
Mhm,
automatically.
mhm,
The softwares I've used basically they just look horrible and they're not believable faces.
mhm.
And the at the beginning, I would sort of show a third person who didn't know the subject, the versions of that subject, and that third person who was totally a total stranger, I would ask them, if which of these faces are real people, and which ones are definitely not real, and I've obviously manipulated them in a computer, and maybe two-thirds of them would get thrown out because it's just very difficult to make versions of a face that are believable, that sort of pass the test
Mhm.
of the
Like
human eye.
possibly human or
I'm
something.
incredibly good at that.
Yeah.
Our brains are basically designed for that. So
Mhm.
um, it was a long, painstaking process. That yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, it kind of like that aspect too, because as I mentioned, the students who are going to see this video and the way that like um, your project and this lecture is going to fit into the lecture series is will have looked at some of Lacan's theories and psychoanalytic theory as it applies to cultural studies. And the aspect you're describing right now reminds me a lot of the notion of it makes me think of one of two things, right? Like you're suggesting, what's being measured and what's being shown so far, as far as what we can take from it, is that people are exposed to these variations of their self-image, and the ones they tend to react to most strongly are ones that uphold these canons of beauty. Now the two big questions for me are, how are they reacting, right? This notion of engagement, is it excitement, is it a draw, is it joy, or is it perhaps something mixed? And it's reminding me of notions of like the uncanny, right? Like, is there something at once that is recognizable but also foreign? And so is there this kind of, I'm more engaged because I see some of myself but not all of myself, or I see some of like a human but also something unhuman kind of quality,
Yeah.
like that.
And that goes back to what I was just saying now. The sort of the uncanny valley, actually, that in robotics
Yeah,
is exactly that. It's sort of how close are you to that sort of dip in credibility,
right,
where the reaction is one of repulsion
yeah,
because it's so close to human, but not there,
yes,
that it becomes repulsive.
yeah,
Whereas sort of an industrial robot in a car factory is not repulsive,
no,
even though it's a robot.
yeah,
If you have these sort of really modern Japanese robots that are, quite lifelike, if you
yeah,
actually saw one up front,
mm-hmm.
they become quite repulsive. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that plays into that.
Mm-hmm.
I do, but that's so difficult to pass out using something like an EEG. I don't think that's possible because it's very it's quite a blunt tool.
Mm-hmm.
All you're really measuring is different kinds of frequencies of all these billions of neurons that are firing,
Mm-hmm.
across the brain, you're just picking up different kinds of frequencies. Which I'd love to come up with a clever analogy, but it's not an accurate tool. It's very
Mm-hmm.
accurate in terms of time, so you
Mm-hmm.
can get it to the millisecond, but you can't get it to the millimeter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So sorry, I'm digressing a bit, but
No, 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 no.
the
I totally understand what you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah the problem becomes, how do you separate like say a familiarity reaction or a repulsion reaction, both of which would fall under mental focus
Mm-hmm.
and therefore engagement. So this is why Suzanne Dick is going to be helping me sort of really pin down the measurements for the next phase, and also Alexander Todorov at Princeton is helping with behavioral measures. So this, simply by asking afterward people to rate each image once they've seen them for the first time in the quick succession in the slideshow. Just asking them to rate each image in those terms.
Mm-hmm.
So rate all of these images for repulsion, familiarity, blah blah blah, and you can start parsing out why they're reacting to certain ones, and you get a bit closer to just filtering it down to a preference reaction. But obviously that's something that's taken me years to sort of to get to that point, because even getting this far has been quite difficult. Just doing it as a personal project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On top of all the other work that you're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The I think that's really interesting that what the people you're working with are suggesting, this idea of having a secondary level of like qualitative input where people consciously say, well, I reacted to this because I found it familiar, because I thought it was beautiful, because of whatever. But it also beckons sort of a question back to what was stated in your video, which is, and I apologize, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of our pre-conscious reaction, right? So that aspect I find really interesting, because it's you're at once sort of first measuring this gut reaction to the image,
Yes.
and then you're layering upon that the assessment of this conscious assessment, right, after the fact. So it's this sort of pre-conscious or subconscious reaction plus the conscious reaction. And it's sort of that part that I find really interesting, and really very much something we can align with, like Lacan's notions of our relationship between our embodied sense of self, our relational sense of self, our how bodies are presented in media or symbolically, in the pages of magazines and what have you, and how we develop our sense of self through these symbolic bodies that may or may not be similar to ourselves. And so sort of taking that to what you were talking about in terms of a lot of the people having a lot of engagement with faces that upheld these canons of beauty, my sort of like theoretical leap was, this is really interesting in terms of suggesting just how powerful mass media images could be for our sense of self and our relationship to our own self-image, because we're not naturally built on the canons of beauty, right? But what you're suggesting in your images is, well, what if we were? Let's see what our reaction would be to our natural self-image, and then this altered self-image, which probably more approximates the images we would see, the photoshopped images we would see in magazines and advertisements and what have you. Do you have any thoughts on that idea?
Well, yeah, there's two things, because the first off, the ideal, what I thought the ideal that would be chosen uh, was often wasn't chosen. And I think the sort of the closer it got to these to the canons, the stranger the images got. The faces didn't they weren't quite as they were just too different, too unbelievable, too symmetrical, too especially for the women, sort of this sort of perfect oval face, the supposedly meant to be most attractive for in the feminine. It's not. It just wasn't necessarily that that caused the gut reaction.
So would you say it was kind of a combo of perhaps their natural image and these canons, or
I wonder whether there's a limit to how much difference people are willing to accept before it becomes and obviously I use these terms, there's no acceptation, it's too fast for that. All of these images, the reactions I'm looking at are for the first 100 milliseconds. None of these conscious processes come into play. So I shouldn't be using those terms, but I mean, maybe there's maybe a gut reaction could be informed by these sort of socially learned image biases. Body image biases. I'd have to talk to somebody who knows more about it, but essentially what was measured was a pre-conscious reaction. So in theory, it's avoiding all of that. It's trying to, what I'm trying to do by only focusing on the first 100 milliseconds is or 125 is avoiding all of that socially learned bias, which and yeah, I couldn't say why people chose the images they chose. I was honestly surprised 100% of the time. I really didn't think that would be the one, but they chose. Or even the group of images, because they were kind of grouped. And the other point is which I've obviously forgotten now. Sorry, you mentioned something else, which
just talking about the embodiment of these beauty standards. But what you just said was kind of interesting. This idea of, if we can get to the pre-conscious sort of level, then perhaps these socially learned standards of beauties wouldn't apply, unless the pre-conscious level is also affected. We tend to think that the pre-conscious level is this sort of safeguarded space, right? Which is separate from the socially constructed and socially learned level. But we might even beg into question that notion that perhaps
that's probably a misconception. That's probably a misconception for us lay persons that don't really know about the neuroscience. The conscious and the pre-conscious are totally separate, because it usually takes 125 milliseconds for the gray matter where the personality lives to kick in after a stimulus appears.
Right.
But that's probably a misconception, in the sense that our gut reactions have to be affected by memory. And our ideal self-images are, they live in our memories, so they're at least affected by it. Memory has to be part of the equation. So I don't know. I mean, it's a very interesting question. But then you're really getting into the nitty-gritty of the psychology of it, and it's really difficult to say. Hopefully this is the kind of question that people will ask themselves, when they see the work.
Absolutely. Well, it's definitely the type of question my students will be discussing in class.
Well, good luck to them. If you come up with an answer, let me know.
We'll just send you a note and say we figured it out. I think, Scott, I'm going to wrap things up there.
Right.
We haven't sort of like answered all the questions, but I feel like we've discussed it to the point where we've sort of opened up all these really incredible possible discussion questions for people to latch onto, all these sort of tendrils. So if that works with you, I think I'll stop it and then here, and then we can chat later. Does that work with you?
Absolutely.
Great. Okay.